I recently posted a video where I talked about what I thought was the worst Yu-Gi-Oh! Structure deck of all time, referring to the Rock structure deck that I felt didn't really have a clear win condition or any consistency whatsoever. I got a lot of positive responses from that video. A lot of them actually said that they didn't feel that was the worst structure deck of all time. They felt it was bad, but they gave a list of others that they felt were even worse than that. And then some of them claimed that the deck actually wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was, and that they used it back in the day and it was good, which I think objectively is just wrong because the deck never saw any competitive success. And if we were looking at decks only in terms of if they won a few games with your high school friends, like that doesn't really count because almost any deck can do that. But it was fun, and one of the things that I saw a lot of was people saying, well, why don't you review more structure decks? And that got me thinking, and I want to try out maybe a new series. I'm pretty bad at continuing with series, but I have a whole bunch of different structure decks that were mentioned a bunch of times, and I think I want to talk about what makes each of them bad. Now, I'm not going to claim that any of these are the worst structure decks because, as we learned in the last video, all of them are sort of different and uniquely bad in their own way. And but anyway, we're going to talk about the structure deck that came out right after the Rock one, and that is Lord of the Storm. So this one is wind based, and a quarter of this deck is based on Harpie Ladies, and that is good and bad. So it's good because some of the Harpie Lady cards, especially for those times, were actually fairly useful. Harpie Lady 1 in particular is pretty good. It gives all your wind monsters 300 attack points. That brings it up to 1600 attack, but it also boosts all your other monsters. This card is not bad by any means. And then in the best forms of support, we have Harpie's Hunting Ground, which can pop back row and boost your Harpies even more. And then also Hysteric Party, which I do have to say, at the time, Hysteric Party wasn't that relevant because there weren't Exceed monsters, or Synchro monsters, or Link monsters to make use of all the extra cards you put on the board. But nowadays, Hysteric Party is one of the most powerful cards in the Harpie arsenal, even considering all the new support they've gotten. So those are sort of like the best case scenario Harpie support that this deck comes with. The problem is that the Lord of the Storm structure deck sticks way too closely to just including any card with Harpie in the name. The best examples of this would be Harpie Lady 2 and 3, both of which don't really do anything. I mean, I know I'm going to get someone that says that these cards are like actually useful, but they're really not. You only want to play Harpie Lady 1, and this is amplified by the fact that you can only have 3 total copies of Harpie Lady 1, 2, and 3 in your deck, which is because they all say they're treated as Harpie Lady while they're in the deck, so you can't actually put more. You can't play like 2 Harpie Lady 1s and 2 Harpie Lady 2s and 2 Harpie Lady 3s. You only have a combined total of 3 copies. The other problem is that there are cards. I mean, the most extreme example is Harpie Girl. This card is literally unplayable. It does nothing for the deck, and you would never want to see this card in your hand ever. The only reason I can think that this card was even included was to give fan service to weird people, but overall this card is just utterly trash. And the difference between a card like this and some of the other bad cards in the Rock structure deck is that this card has no use. Like it's bad attack points. It has no like good stats whatsoever. At this point, it's not even good extra deck monsters to use this card with. It's useless, and that's sort of like the problem with this deck. If the overall theme of this deck is Harpie Ladies, and then what I'm going to talk about in a second, Harpie Girl fits in this awkward spot where it doesn't do anything besides be a name in a deck that doesn't really care about that. And that sort of trickles down to the bigger issue with this deck, which is that it doesn't actually have a win condition. The Rock structure deck might have lacked a win condition because it didn't have any way to actually finish your opponent off, but at least it had a cohesive strategy. If we look at the other half of quote-unquote strategy in this deck, it's not looking so hot. And you can tell this because Swift Birdman Joe is actually one of, if not the best cards in this deck, and that's not good. Swift Birdman Joe, I don't know why it's so hard to say, isn't really that powerful. If you tribute summon it using a wind monster, you bounce everything and the back rows back to the owner's hands. That's not worth it. I mean, it's just giant Trunade on legs that requires like a bunch of setup. Doesn't really have high attack points, and it's just this deck doesn't have anything really to take advantage of this effect anyway. But at very least, the whole point of the second half of this deck is to bounce back row to your opponent's hand and then somehow capitalize on it. If Swift Birdman Joe is the best example of this, probably in my opinion, one of the worst examples is going to be the Lady Ninja card, which instead of tributing a monster to summon it, if you discard a win monster, you bounce everything back to the owner's hands. The problem with this card is that while it does have the same back row bouncing effect, you really have to work hard to capitalize on it because you discard a card out of your hand, and this card has no good stats. I mean, it's level 3, 1100 attack points. It's just not very viable, where at least with Swift Birdman Joe, you might bounce some stuff to get in 2300 damage. This one's only doing 1100 at most. Now, these cards aren't inherently bad. It's just that the cards that are meant to take advantage of these effects are pretty bad. So when you think of conventional Yu-Gi-Oh! Or modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, when you play decks that focus on nullifying your opponent's back row, the whole point of it is to then OTK them, because back row traps are generally meant to stop you from doing damage. Cards like Mirror Force or Fiendish Chain or even Solemn Strike are all meant to take down your monsters so you can't inflict a lot of damage on them. So in the past, decks that play a lot of back row destruction, especially decks that were heavily combo based, were doing so just to get all of the disruptive cards off their opponent's side of the field so they could OTK them. This deck might try to emulate that, but it doesn't do it very well. And what I mean by that is if we take a look at Sonic Shooter, which I believe was a new card in this deck. I don't believe this was actually in the game yet. But this thing's effect is pretty straightforward. If there are no cards in your opponent's spell or trap card zones, this card can attack your opponent's life points directly. When it does, any battle damage this card inflicts to your opponent becomes the original attack of this card. It's not like this is bad card design, because I get it. It's kind of cool to get in some direct damage if your opponent doesn't have any back row. This is sort of similar to the card Black Tyranno, which is a dinosaur card that can attack directly if your opponent has only defense position monsters. It's sort of in the same vein as that card, except, oh, wait, you can only do 1300 damage, because for whatever reason, Konami thought that this card would have been just way too powerful if it gave the potential to do more than 1300 damage, because if you don't know what it means by it only does the original attack of this card, it means no matter how many buffs you put on this card, it only does the 1300 damage. Now I'll say that there are a couple cards that change the original attacks of cards, but all of them aren't really viable, especially for this time period. I'm not even sure if there were any when this deck came out that did that. But nowadays, there are a couple cards that change the original attack points, but nothing that would be worth putting on a Sonic Shooter. And here's like the biggest issue with this deck is that why would you go out of your way to play Sonic Shooter when you could just play bigger monsters? Like, you don't even need the whole attacking directly effect. It's just better to play. I mean, honestly, it'd be better just to summon Harpie Lady 1. Like, having a 1600 attack monster that threatens more damage with not only the field spell, but also boosting your other monsters is just an infinitely better normal summon than Sonic Shooter, disregarding a lot of the actual Harpie Lady support that comes in this deck that obviously makes you want to play Harpie Lady 1. Sonic Shooter, it doesn't do anything. And then we carry that on, unfortunately, to the boss monster, which is arguably worse than Exod from the Rock Structure deck. Samorg, Bird of Divinity. What are you doing? Okay, so it can't be special summon. And if you compare that to Exod, obviously that makes it a little worse, except that back in the day, a lot of these structure decks actually came with cards that couldn't be special summoned as the boss monster. I'm not sure why. It was probably to keep them from being quote-unquote too good, although none of their effects were very broken to begin with. So if you tribute summon this card, all attributes must be win, so don't even think about playing this in other decks. It's just impossible. And then it's big payoff for this. You have to tribute 2 win monsters. You have to -2 to summon this thing. What do you get? Well, it's worse than the Exod 1000 burn damage, because this one is a 1000 burn damage during each of the end phases, but it goes to yourself and also it can be circumvented by having back row. So if it's your end phase, you take 1,000 damage minus, and what I mean by minus is it takes away, it's decreased, I guess that's the word that it uses. It's decreased by 500 for each spell and trap card you control. So the idea is that you summon this thing, and then you set 2 back row, so you take no damage. Passes to your opponent's turn, and now sort of they have the opportunity to set back row to circumvent the 1,000 damage. Here's the thing. If this card just did 1,000 damage, even if it did 1,000 damage to your opponent during their end phase, it would not be playable. It would still be bad. But the fact that it also inflicts 1,000 damage to you, the fact that your opponent can just set back row to avoid it, makes this card completely unplayable. You know, I was too hard on Exod, and I realize that now, because looking at this card, you realize that a guaranteed 1,000 damage every turn is a lot better than a non-guaranteed 1,000 damage per turn. And you can see here how this doesn't even combo with what the deck is trying to do. Your cards are bouncing the opponent's back row back to their hand, not destroying them. This card, you summon it, and it's not like your opponent is out of back row to set. No, you just bounce it back to their hand, so they can just reset it and then avoid like taking the damage. It's just... This card's so bad. It's just embarrassing, and I can't believe that this card is like printed on the structure deck. It's boss monsters back in the day were just really bad in these structure decks, and I'm not sure why, because it seems like Konami really went out of their way to make this card like utterly terrible. Lastly, I will briefly mention, although maybe this is nitpicking, the spells and traps in this structure deck are pretty bad as well. My 2 favorite mentions are the single copy of Reckless Greed, which is obviously bad because you only ever want to play Reckless Greed in multiples to make the drawback not so bad. So you can kind of stack it up and draw 4 cards and only have to skip 2 draw phases. But I think the most hilarious addition to this deck is the single copy of Ninjutsu Art of Transformation, and I think this shows how Konami's thought process on structure decks has changed, because in a modern structure deck, if Konami included the ninja cards, they would have definitely included 2 of the Lady Ninja and 2 Ninjutsu Art of Transformation, but this deck includes 1 copy of both of them, and this card can only work with the Lady Ninja. Like, that is the only thing in this deck that I can work with, unless I'm missing something, which I don't think I am. And yeah, this card's cool when it resolves, I'll be honest. It summons basically anything from your deck by attributing that terrible level 3 monster. But the chances of you in a deck with 0 searching, I mean, I guess there's like Flying Kamakuri, but that's not very consistent. The chances of you having this card at the same time that you have the Lady Ninja is just, it's not going to happen. It's really bad. These cards should have just not been in the deck. I get that they were looking for wind monsters that bounce back row, but this doesn't make any sense. It's never going to happen. I know what some of you are going to say. Well, Doug, you can just buy 3 structure decks and you got 3 copies of them. The problem is that these structure decks are advertised as being playable out of the box, which might not sound important, but when you have 2 copies of Flying Kamakuri and only 1 copy of the Ninjutsu Art of Transformation, makes the deck look a little bad, because Konami has the capability, they have the capacity to put double copies of cards in these decks, but they just refuse to do it on the good cards. It's just really stupid. But anyway, that is my structure deck review. We're going to talk about some more bad ones. The fire one and the original zombie one were pretty popular picks. Also, I want to apologize. I'm pretty sick. I've been sick for the past couple days. That's why I haven't posted videos. I'm sure I'll get lots of comments saying, Doug, you sound weird in this video. But anyway, I'll see you guys later. Bye.